What it do, y'all? Chase Taylor here with another episode of Taylor Made Macro, where we let others stay on top of markets while we try and get to the bottom of them. I have a great guest for you today, my friend Warren Pies of 314 Research. Warren is a lawyer by training, but one of the best investors and thought leaders in our game that I have the most respect for. If you live under a rock and you're not familiar with Warren, I'm happy to introduce him to you, and if you do know his work, I hope this episode lets you go deeper on how he thinks and what makes him different. You can follow Warren on Twitter at Warren Pies, and you can follow 314 at the number 3F_research. And their website is the number 3, then all letters, 14research.com. They provide research for institutions, so if you run money for a living and do not subscribe, you should definitely reach out to them for some samples because it is truly great research. Speaking of truly great research, also check out pinecomacro.com for detailed show notes from today's show, as well as what we offer to investors. If you're looking for someone who cares about risk management to manage your retirement, check out Bulwark Capital, where I'm the head of research, by going to bulwarkcapitalmanagement.com, and that's bulwarkcapitalmgmt.com to learn more about our firm. All right, on to the interview. All right, Warren Pies, welcome to the show, brother.
Thank you for having me. It's I guess I'm number 4, so feels like an honor.
Yeah, and we'll dig into all the reasons that we got you that honor, because I think it's well deserved. There's a lot of things about you and your work that I admire a great deal. Before we go diving in, and the first question I'm going to get into is very, very nerdy, which I think you'll appreciate. But before that, as always, we don't allow people to say good question around here, and if you do, we like to give a little money away to charity. So do you have a charity for us this week?
Yeah, actually could give you a charity. The charity would be Bridge a Life, like the letter A. It's a local group here in the Sarasota area where I'm from that helps provide resources to foster families. So it's a good charity, and I'm a pretty skeptical person. We'll probably talk about that today. And so I'm skeptical with where I put my charity dollars, and it's a good cause and a good organization. So if I screw up and say good question, that's where the money will go.
Sounds awesome. Yeah, it's funny. I didn't know where in Florida you were. I just knew you were in Florida. I spent like 3 months in Tampa a few years ago, and I do, as much as I don't like Florida, and you'll get a feel for that later. But I got to say that area is my favorite part. So I'll allow it when it comes to where you live in Florida.
Okay.
All right. All right. So first and foremost, one of my favorite things from you, and something that I've kind of, I don't want to say stolen from you, but where your work has had a big impact on me, is housing. So, and as you know, and as all the listeners know, most of my questions are very like process oriented. I like to focus on how people think, not really like what they think. But I can't help but go here with the curiosity that I have on housing. So construction and construction employment, they're important to me in my cycle work, just like they are for yours. And last year, whenever you started to back away from recession calls because of it, I was too stubborn, and I kept clinging to my recession stuff. And I definitely should have followed you and your housing, your construction model on that. Recently, you talked to our mutual pal, Kevin Muir, on the Market Huddle about how you look for a drawdown in residential construction employment, but you acknowledge that it's kind of tough in real time because of the heavy revisions. And just recently we had the BLS's BED, which looks like it's going to revise out a lot of construction jobs in Q3 of 2023. My question was, have you guys worked that into y'all's models at all? Is it even worth trying to work that in? Really, I just want an up-to-date view from you on how you're thinking about construction employment.
Yeah, that's a lot there, and I appreciate the shout out on the call last year, because I mean, this is a hard environment, and it goes to why we focus where we do with the residential construction payrolls. Is if you're going to make a recession call, and I think it's top down macro investing, that's the 800-pound gorilla. Are we going to be growing or not? Get a recession every, say, 6 years on average, and they're really hard to identify beforehand. As we've seen this cycle, there's always a set of indicators that you can point to that can scare you into that recession view. So whether it's the yield curve or LEIs or, any set of scary PMIs, also soft data was obviously a big thing this cycle. Our view is we need a framework, and that a framework is superior to a point in time prediction. So a point in time prediction is something like yield curve inverted, whether it's 3-month, 10-year, 2-year, 10-year, whatever your measure is. And then you start your countdown clock. It's like 20 to 24 months later, we should expect a recession based on history. That's kind of a point in time prediction rather than a framework. And a framework's more like, we are going to model out what's happening in the housing industry, and then we're going to predict what level of residential construction jobs are needed. And the reason you do that is because if you study modern recessions, they're predated with a drawdown in residential construction payrolls, as you said. So our view is if we can understand the housing economy well enough, that we can back into what's going to happen with those jobs numbers. And then obviously you get those numbers, as you alluded to, they can be revised. And so that's the process. That's the theory behind it. A couple things that I like to point out to people is, the economy is like a super tanker. It takes a lot to move it. And when you have job losses going into a recession, you really get cyclical components of the economy that are doing most of the heavy lifting on the job losses. So if you think about construction's less than 5% of total jobs in the US. But if you go back through, and that's the average number over modern history. But if you go back and look at your typical recession, construction's accountable for about 15% of total jobs lost peak to trough in a recession. So you take all that together, and that's our baseline, right? So that's how we look at the world. That's the framework that we think is superior to the prediction methodology. So right now, you're making new all-time highs on residential construction payrolls, and I know you're saying you're seeing data that could suggest a revision. We don't really go to that data source. And what I would say is, when I look at housing starts and the mix of housing starts and the backlog of units under construction and all that stuff, actually the level of jobs that we're seeing in the non-farm payrolls seem accurate to me. They could get revised modestly here or there, almost always do, like you said. But there's nothing alarming in the housing starts data, in the huge backlog of units under construction. I know people are getting into the multifamily stuff and saying like, well, hey, multifamily's in a recession. Yep, multifamily's in a recession, but a multifamily unit produces 1/3 the jobs that a single family unit produces, and the single family market is really tight. And I think we bottomed on starts. And so when I take all that together, and I think I sent you some stuff that probably has this in our models and stuff in it. When you take all that together, I just don't, given our framework and our housing framework, I don't have the evidence to call for a recession. And that was last year. We got pretty bullish when the Fed did their verbal pivot. And we said, basically, really simple model of the world. You can't make a call for recession, new highs, no drawdown in residential construction payrolls, and the Fed is dovish. It's a good idea to be long equities in that type of scenario historically.
To stay with construction for a second, I noticed you guys obviously lean on residential construction, and you just explained exactly why, which I think makes plenty of sense. And this is very detailed, and no one's going to care about this, but it's my show, so I'm asking. Do you include residential specialty trade contractors, or do you go just like with the line item of residential construction? I know that's very detailed, but
yeah, I mean, we've done some stuff on that and tried to expand it out, but we didn't get any better signal by doing that.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
So, and you can even go as far as, like mortgage servicers, and you can get, there's other, you can get more, you can go farther out, but I haven't found any additional signal. So we kind of it's sometimes simplicity is better than, and looking at having one tool that you know really well versus trying to bring everything else. It kind of dilutes the signal, in my opinion. which I totally readily admit that we could miss something based on that, but historically you haven't. So no, I don't. We really focus on that line item from non-farm payrolls.
Gotcha. And that's why I asked, because I knew you would have done the homework to check it. And to go even further. And this is something I literally just started doing, but I decided to take a look at like hours and wages and stuff, like to go more aggregate. Is that something you guys have looked at to make sure there's not like underlying weakness that might be telling you anything?
We have, and that's a little bit noisy is what I've found, to be honest. I mean, I may not have looked at it in the right exact way, but we've definitely done that. And there have been some false signals, because you've seen, like, are you talking just within residential construction?
Yeah, residential construction, and then look at just.
I don't think we've looked at. I can't recall, to be totally honest, us testing the total hours concept within the construction segment of the market. We've done it for the whole economy.
Actually, now that you mention it, I don't think they break it out by residential and non. Yeah,
that would make sense. That's probably why we didn't do it. But yeah, I don't think we looked at. I was going to say we didn't look at that, but we have looked at total hours for the economy. And I mean, average work week hours, and we've done it for the manufacturing component. I'm pretty sure they have that average hourly work week for the manufacturing component. I just see it as it's a little noisy. We had some false signals actually this cycle from it. And it goes to kind of my point of, like, sometimes additional complexity and we monitor all this stuff, but sometimes if you pull too many things in, you can just become paralyzed. Like we're going to talk about the books and favorite books in this podcast, I think. And one of my favorite movies and one of my favorite authors is Cormac McCarthy. So from No Country for Old Men, there's a sign or a phrase that the assassin uses, and it's something like, you pick the one tool, you choose the one tool for the job, and that's the tool. Like, don't use, because he got mad they're using two different assassins besides him. I kind of feel like that. You choose the right tool for the job, and you stick to it, and you just refine it over and over until you really know it well. And that's what I think we've done with residential construction payrolls.
All right, I'm going to beat this dead horse one last time, and that is to ask if you think non-residential may matter more this cycle, just because of the boom and manufacturing, construction, and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I think it could very well matter. I think you're going to get very little signal this time there. I think it matters less, though. It's just we have this new era industrial policy that is creating so much non-residential construction activity and spending. And so I think, if anything, you could have residential activity weaken in this cycle, but then have non-residential construction activity hang in there. And so, yeah, no, I think it's a weird cycle, and you have to kind of think through that part of it. But what we've also found is that through other cycles, again, under totally admitting that this is a weird one, but I think that what I'm about to say is only going to be exacerbated in this cycle, which is that in typical past cycles, the leading edge of the economy is the residential construction market, not the non-residential construction employment. That's more commensurate or coincident as an indicator, versus the ResCon will roll over in advance. It gives you that leading signal that you're looking for. That's why usually you see, and this is on a revised basis, 8 to 10% drawdown in residential construction payrolls at the time the NBER dates the recession. So remember, the NBER is like 6 or 12 months later on actually announcing it. So you're going to be in the recession before you realize it, and hopefully the residential construction numbers will give you that heads up. And you haven't seen it from non-residential. I don't think, given that government spending, it's pretty well defined, and for many years into the future. I don't think you're going to get a contraction there. If you do, it would be really surprising, and it's not going to give you I just don't expect it. I think all the movement's going to be in residential.
Yeah. All right. Totally makes sense for sure. And I think you could even argue it might help dampen the problem if I've read a little bit, some of these people like really need construction like employees and they can't find them. So if a few shake loose from residential housing, they may just find their way over to building the next battery plant or whatever. So,
Yeah, well, that was
um,
I just wrote a tweet last night about crowding out, and I do like the
mhm.
concept of crowding out that Druckenmiller was talking about with the deficit spending. And I've you touch nerves when you talk like that, but that is where you see the crowding out. There is, if we decide to build to onshore the semiconductor manufacturing process, that's fine. That's a societal decision, but that there's only so much construction labor out there, and you pull from that pool, which is, going to crowd out and drive up the overall cost of labor, and ultimately, what suffers is the housing market, in my opinion, this cycle, because of those policies. That's where the crowding out shows up most acutely, in my opinion.
So I ask all these detailed questions knowing this is very heavily art and not just science. And I think you already kind of touched on that well. But I think this is what makes you special. Like you guys have a very detailed models and you use state of the art tools to help you organize your data and your models. But at the same time, like I see you using the creative side and not being afraid of pattern recognition, things you pick up along the way. It's also clear that you're well read and multidisciplinary. You commented on a Randall Wray book the other day, and I laughed because I know half the MMT folks probably have not even read it. And then I see you citing boring BLS white papers. Talk to us a little bit about the marriage of the quanti data stuff and then good old fashioned macro calls because your back hurts.
Oh man, I figured you would pick up on that. From listening to your podcast and getting to know you, I think there's like a whole group of us that travel a similar path through the GFC, and understand encountering MMT and then trying to essentially disprove it or understand it. Totally blew our minds and what our preconceived ideas were. So that's where the Randall Wray thing comes from. But I mean, I used to say I was an attorney for a little while. I went to law school and all that stuff, and I don't know. I used to have people ask me like, what is that? How does that help you in your career right now? And my usual response is it doesn't help me at all. But maybe that's not fair to it. Maybe I did pick something up from it. Maybe it's, I can say one thing I'm able to do if I have to, I can criticize myself too, if you really want to go to that route. But if I was going to give myself credit, I can generally take an issue and argue both sides, which is, ultimately you got to weigh all the evidence and be honest with yourself and come up with the right answer. But it's a little bit, I think I could scare myself how good of an argument I can make on either side of an issue oftentimes. And so that's probably what you're seeing come out is I just have that, and that could be from my background as an attorney, is like the ability to take an issue, see both sides, argue both sides, build a case for both sides. And that causes you to just dig and read and turn over stones and understand underlying processes and things like that. Is where right now we're almost like just doggedly attached to this shelter inflation issue, which we think is a big deal, which, I've ended up reading basically every BLS white paper I could find. And it's a total morass, but you kind of have to do that. I don't think I don't know how easy it is to come across an edge anyways. Generally, I think you get your easiest edge from anyone in our shoes is just a behavioral edge, which comes through models and processes. But if you want to have any kind of informational edge, you better be ready to roll your sleeves up and read and code and do everything right and hope for a little luck too. So yeah, that's, I feel kind of like that's table stakes. If you don't do that, you're not going to win consistently in this very competitive world we're in. So yeah, I'm driven by that. That's my background, and I'm glad to hear that it comes out. I don't know. It's interesting to hear that that's just the way we do things. So it's interesting to hear you reflect that back.
Obviously, maybe you're just born that way, but that suggests to me that the lawyer, your time in law, like definitely had a huge impact. It all reminded me, of course, of the Charlie Munger quote, "I never disagree with someone else's opinion unless I understand their side better than they do." So you're just kind of doing that with yourself, all day, every day. And I think and you have, you explain your framework, which is very Bayesian, and you're just constantly updating it. So if you're always updating your framework and you're always arguing both sides of it with yourself, like you're going to come to the proper conclusions at the proper time. I would argue more often than most people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of these guys that like, the Soroses of the world and people like that, they have so many, like you said, Munger, they have so many good like idioms and pieces of wisdom. And I think that like Soros was always talking about how he likes making mistakes, and that's like he prides himself on his mistakes and all of this stuff. And I hate making mistakes, but you really have to. But I do take that in, and I'm like, you know what, you're gonna make them, and you've got to move incrementally, and you've got to be able to weigh the evidence. And the only way you're ever gonna get out of a mistake is to understand the evidence and how tough almost every one of these decisions are, how efficient these markets are. And unless you can appreciate that, then you would just become stuck in a bad trade, ultimately. And that's like my nightmare is being stuck in a bad trade and not being able to see my way out of it. So a lot of it is this like constant paranoia of being stuck in a bad trade. And I'm trying to, preempt that through research and processes.
Yeah. So you mentioned the law. You went from lawyer to oil guy to everything guy. And in my view, you have a better informed view on everything than just about anybody. I'm an everything guy, and I always make the joke that my knowledge is a mile wide and an inch deep. But I feel like yours is a mile wide and a foot deep. It's impressive, and I want to know what your secret is.
Oh man. Well, number one, my secret is I'm not really all that deep, or I'm not all that wide, I should say. I just pick the right things to study, in my opinion, the things I think are going to be right. And then I study them intensely. And then, you do that with enough topics and you accumulate some knowledge, and I was on a call with a client yesterday morning, actually, in a pretty big hedge fund who have been clients with me. They were clients at my old firm with me. They transferred over and they were clients at my new firm. And they're tough. It's your classic Wall Street hedge fund. And they went, number one, they said, what can you tell us to make us money right now? Which is always like a really hard question. And then they rattled off, maybe 10 different things that they asked me my opinion about. And the thing is, you can't BS these guys. You can't BS smart people. There's a whole team of people sitting there on a call. They're all over the world. They're in South America. They're in Europe. They're in Greenwich. They're in Miami. And I'm not going to sit there and BS them. So they asked me about like 10 things. And I said, I don't know to 7 of them, And so like they asked me, do you have an opinion about the yen? It's like, not really. Not really. No, I don't. Nothing that can really help you. If I was at a cocktail party, I can just make something up, and sound smart, but in a way to make you money and actually, have a trade. No. And so I think that part of it is learning that you can say, I don't know to some things. And then once you find something you think matters, really work in it, and so that would be my secret, is that I'm not really as wide as I probably appear. I just keep going back to these things. I love markets also. I really think they're interesting. The behavioral side, the macroeconomic side, just, watching the race market is really interesting to me. So I don't know. It's a combination of interest and ultimately, I really do stay in my lane more than it probably looks.
All right, so I'm going to read a couple quotes. I promise this is going to be my quota for the day, if you will. But you like hit on two that were too good, and I had them standing by. And that one is the George Soros quote. He said, "To others, being wrong is a source of shame. To me, recognizing my mistakes is a source of pride. Once we realize that imperfect understanding is the human condition, there's no shame in being wrong, only in failing to correct our mistakes." And the other one is from a guy I think you might know named Ned Davis. He said, "We're in the business of making mistakes. Winners make small mistakes and losers make big mistakes." So you kind of mentioned that, like that deep fear of having a bad trade. I know you, even when you're doing, practicing law and everything, like you were kind of running your own account. Did you ever have any like big like drawdowns that left like massive scars?
Yeah, I did. I have.
Same.
I've, you know what? They almost always go towards, biotech stocks that I have no business owning. That's those would be, I mean, you know, they're just the most seductive stories, and you can learn enough about the underlying science to trick yourself into thinking that you've got something. And I've had two. So here's the thing. Yes, the short answer to your question is yes. My worst losses I can remember so well, and they were all low quality businesses without like real cash flows. Um, I'd say two biotechs and a shipping company, and I've had plenty of tough times with energy stocks as I was in the energy space for so long, and there was just like multi-year bear market there. Um, and the real lesson, the way that's impacted me, we've built this into our models at 314 is I'm really big on quality. I'm not a value guy or a story guy. I'm big on sticking to what you know, and not to buy like that's where we're a quantitative shop. Like we're gonna when we buy stocks, we're buying based off of a quant system that we've built. We're not buying on a story. And this is not to denigrate anyone, but I was listening to TV literally today, thinking this because everyone's on TV on the financial TV stations, you know, and they do like the round table where they have to pitch a stock. And, you know, I go on TV sometimes, but I never pitch like a single stock on television. And I just think they have their little story, like, you know, Amgen's doing this with this drug and like, this is going to happen. And I'm just thinking like, in reality, that's a nice story. And it's, you know, it's a good for like cocktail parties and stuff like that. But in reality, that's all in the stock. There's nothing that you're saying that's really actually meaningful. In trying to understand the story of a stock, when you start realizing how many resources are poured into understanding each individual equity on a fundamental story basis, is just futile. So I know that you asked me for the drawdowns. This is what those are the drawdowns: low quality businesses, biotechs, shipping companies, things that I rode too long without a good risk management system. I did that years ago, and I've done it more frequently or more recently, even up to 2019. I had to learn that lesson again. So yeah, that's a yes. And I have those scars, and I've tried my best to build systems at our company that will prevent us from ever making that mistake for our clients.
Yeah, I hear you. I can't remember if it was either Paul Tudor Jones or maybe his name escapes me. It was like a really legendary trader that he like refused to hire anyone that hadn't blown up an account. And having blown up an account and knowing how much it impacts your future risk management from that point forward, like as soon as I learned that fact about whoever it was, I was just like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. It's just something about learning that lesson that you there's no way to impart that wisdom on someone other than them just like feeling it. I have a lot of respect for the people that have never had a really significant problem like that, because I never could have learned without having touched the fire. I'm pivoting a little bit here though. One thing I'm obsessed with is tools to make me more productive. So I like to ask guests about that, especially more productive in reading, keeping notes, stuff like that. Do you have any tools that we may not know about that you think that help you do more with your time than most?
I learned how to kind of speed read years ago when I was in law school, and when I was and that helped me. I don't really know. I think I did like a little program on it. You can find.
I need to learn how to do that so bad.
And just kind of, I think speed reading, if you're able to get it down, is a useful thing. I don't know how much that's going to matter anymore in the future with AI and all that coming out. You can just put documents into the AI and get back like a summary without even having to read it. So maybe that's not going to be a very good tool anymore or useful. But that's something. I mean, just being able to read quickly, figure out what's important, what's not. The other thing I don't know. I like having a certain amount of downtime. I have a process when it comes to research and writing and thinking things through, and I like to have like a 2 or 3 days where I don't really have a lot of demands on my time for for producing something. Like there's some research shops, I don't know how frequently you write these days, but some research shops will write every day. And I don't want to write every day. I need to sit and think for like a few days. And a lot of times I think it's just my like subconscious that has to get populated with ideas and even just recover from the last report we write. Because when we write these reports, I mean, it takes a lot out of us. That might sound kind of silly, but it's the truth.
No, I know very well what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, and then if the market does something different, you could have like a whole thesis that you lay out and you've spent months or potentially even years when you take it all together, putting it together. Then something happens in the Middle East or with the Fed or in the banking sector, and your whole thesis is just out the window. Just tear it up. It's frustrating, but that's the game. And so I would say it's speed reading is my answer, and then also just giving yourself, not being in the pressure to produce something every single day, so that you have time to let your subconscious just adapt or take in something that you can't consciously perceive.
Yeah, so I have I had a prepared question specifically for that. This is something I think about a lot. I think we all collect dots in a very similar way. You know, we read a bunch, we look at charts, we look at the data. Like we farm dots all day, every day, and that to me that's easy. What's hard is connecting those dots. And I think everyone does that differently. Obviously, like just in general, downtime is like you. I think that's where you get it. You know, it often happens when you're relaxing and not focusing hard on really anything. How do you find that you best connect those dots? Like, I want to know if you have any practices you kind of undertake in order to do that, or like for me, I usually get out into nature, but I know in Florida, nature will kill you. So I'm curious how you do it.
Well, I mean, I work out quite a bit. That's like my therapy. I take a walk every night and I work out every day. And I try to do. I've done podcasts where they ask me, what is your workout routine? And I got into some of it, but like I like some workouts that are intense enough and involved enough where your mind is being occupied. And so like, for instance, I've gotten into years ago, I started boxing, and I would just show up once a week at least and just hit mitts with the guy who runs the gym. And I don't know, it sounds like it's not that hard of a workout, but it's a really intense workout, really. And it's kind of like Simon Says, with a lot of cardio mixed into it. And you get to exercise your nervous system. Your nervous system just kind of is relaxed after that. I mean, how many times do you smash something like 500 times just over and over, and you get that out of you? It's great. So things like that, like hard workouts are my secret, and things that can occupy your mind. Like when you're doing that, or if you're doing something intense like that, your mind doesn't have time to think about things or wander actively. You have to be focused on the task. And then every night to wind down, I try at sunset, I want to walk around my neighborhood. And it's just, and so that's kind of, I'd say, my two big ways to let the dots connect, as you say.
Love it. All right. What's the biggest thing you've changed your mind about in the last year?
Man, I change my mind all the time. That's one of my.
So what's one that kind of hurt though?
Well, I mean, the most painful one in the last year was I was wrong about markets publicly for the first time in my life. And the big problem, as you alluded to with that, was the expectation that there was going to be a recession. So we came in last year, and everyone thought we were going to have a recession, for whatever it's worth, and they thought we were going to have one soon. And our framework that I just went over was pointing more towards maybe the second half of 2023. And then again, going back to like the indicator macro, I was kind of getting away from my process. We were looking a lot at things that are happening in the bond market. Bond market was sending some really nasty signals. 1 year forward rates, less the 1 year yield, was just off the charts low. And then we had the banking crisis and the SVB, in March. And I wrote probably the most bearish report of my time at 314 Research right around there. And of course, we rallied hard off that banking crisis. The Fed stepped in, they backstopped everything with BTFP, and the rest is history. And that was really hard. I had gone on TV and was saying we were selling the top of that range and things like that, and really difficult to do that. And then also thinking there's going to, at the same time, we were starting to see yields back up into the summer, which was hurting the housing framework we had. And so that was a difficult time. And we ultimately, by the middle of the year, if I remember everything right, we basically called off our recession call. And it was somewhat agonizing to do it, because it's you had dug your feet in. I had built such a good case, like I said, for a recession. The bond market is a smart money, and the bond market was screaming with horrible signals. And we weren't like, we reduced equity exposure by 10% below benchmark, but it's the public feeling of being public about these calls, and then having to get out from under that. So that was definitely it. And we did change our mind, and it was all through the housing market framework. It just validated like my whole thought process that I laid out at the beginning of this podcast, which is that you need a framework. The economy is such a difficult thing. There's always, if you're looking for negative things in the economy or negative indicators, you can find them. Like I could make and I do it just to prove to clients I can do it before we go on and say, look, we don't think there's a recession. So, and there's always this worry that when you flip from one stance to another, that you're just going to, that what you had thought before is going to swing back and just take your legs out. So it's a tough thing to do. And that was it. Going from thinking there would be a recession later in 2023 to calling that recession off by the middle of the year was definitely the hardest thing to change my mind on in the last year.
Awesome answer. And you kind of talked earlier about how we've had sort of similar paths from GFC to here. And I think we definitely have. It's funny you say that, because I started my research business in 2018. Very similar thing where like I really had nailed it for the entire time. And then last year, super like in the economic bear camp, to the point where like everyone's like, oh, like it's a total, consensus that we're going to have a recession. And I'm like, yeah. But these people are talking about a shallow recession. We're going to have a big one. So I went out there and I didn't pivot back until, so in October when we had the little drawdown, I'm like, oh, here it comes, baby. And then, they pivot, and then financial conditions just loosen like there's no tomorrow. And at that point, like you would have been insane to stay in that camp. So like I did get out there, but so if it makes you feel better, I did a much worse job last year.
I mean, well, we had a lot of company. I mean, most everybody had the recession call. My honest experience, like, I think we can be hard on ourselves, and we should be hard on ourselves. I mean, like, I'm my strongest critic, I think. But, if I saw the people who came into 23 really bulled up for the most part, not everyone, I'm sure there's people who zigged and zagged with everything in the economy, were permabulls who got destroyed in 2022. So, show me your 22 plus 23 returns, and then we'll have a conversation about who's great. That's kind of what I've been saying.
Yeah, that is a great point. This cycle has been so crazy that I think that the 2-3 year look back is more important maybe than ever. So last question before we go to Between Two Pines. What is your favorite book that is at least 30 years old, and why? And if you got more than one, you kind of alluded to one earlier, but if you have more than one, that's great.
No, I'm going to go with where I alluded. We like put a lot of quotes at the beginning of our reports and stuff like that. One of the, you asked me also, how do you connect dots? I think sometimes like fiction helps you for some reason. If you take some time away from what you're doing and read fiction or listen to a fiction audiobook. So in that vein, Blood Meridian is probably the book for me, from Cormac McCarthy. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, but it's a classic book. It's Gothic Western, and it's really based on real history. Like, that's the thing I like about it, is it's a story, but it's a historical fiction. And it's a
I got to stop you there. What is Gothic fiction or Gothic Western? I don't know what that means.
Western. Well, if you read the book, you know it's very much like, I think they talked about turning into a movie for years, and like no one can really do the movie right because it's just one horrible thing after another that happens in the book. It's basically a gang of outlaws who are roaming the Texas-Mexico border back in like the mid 1800s and having these battles with themselves and battles with different Indians that they encounter. And it's based actually off, I forget what the actual history account is, but the author Cormac McCarthy, he based it off of a account of it's the Glanton gang, I think, that was the gang that they follow around in the book. It's just crazy. It's very dark. At the end, there's kind of like some metaphysical stuff, and you have to kind of think about it. It's not just, it goes from being just like a story, a very like depressing, tough story to listen to sort of metaphysical at the end. And I don't know, with a mystery hook, and I kind of like that stuff. So it gets me on a few different levels. I use quotes from that book a lot in our reports just because it's very quotable.
I do appreciate the fact that you're a sucker for quotes, as am I, as everyone just learned with me reading 3 during a podcast. But so I'm a Texan, so you kind of got me there. My problem is I think I've read 2 fiction books in the last 25 years. I need to learn how to do it. Every page of a fiction book, I'm just like, there's something I should be learning, and I'm not learning, which is it's a character flaw, not something to be proud of. So I got to work on that.
Well, I don't know. Do you ever listen? Do you like history podcasts or anything?
I love history.
This is like a hardcore history podcast with a story. So that's what I think of. Like I like Ian Carlin's,
and I love hardcore history. Yep.
Like, so if you like that kind of stuff, and you're like, okay, this is historic fiction, you can maybe get into it better. So
I'm gonna give it a shot. And just for the listeners, like someday I'm building a real physical library that is sort of a macro library, like a little bit like the library of mistakes. And I'm going to have like a special section just for like everything everyone's mentioned on the podcast. And I think this is the 2nd or 3rd fiction book already. So I need to get with it and join the club here.
And if you wanted a finance book, I would go back to that Randall Wray book. I try to remember the name. It's like Understanding Modern Money, I think it was.
Okay.
I mean, you've probably read it.
We'll get all these in the show notes.
Yeah. I mean, that was transformation.
One of his only. Yeah. All right. It's time to sit on the hot stump for Between Two Pines.
Give it to me.
I'd like to welcome Warren Buffett to Between Two Pines. Wait, this is just some other Warren. Anyways, we'll do the interview anyway, I guess. Warren is the manager of the Florida Man fantasy football team, and apparently writes a little about markets and then talks about them on your grandma's TV. And that brings me to our first question. You're on CNBC more than Kramer these days, and yet it usually looks like Plato's cave from the home office in Florida. Either you live in Bin Laden's compound or you're a vampire. What is up with the lack of lights in the Pies dungeon?
Oh man, I don't know why. Whenever I go on television or on podcast, everyone thinks I have I have no credibility. Like I started doing them from my bedroom, and then I moved into my office, and I can't. I guess the lighting just is not right or something. But I actually have a really nice house. I don't want to. I had a few guys tell me like they wouldn't listen to me because my place looks pretty bad, and I almost posted pictures of it. But I was like, that's just not my personality. So.
Yeah, that is a dumb reason not to listen to someone. And I kind of appreciate the fact they don't have those stupid selfie like circle lights everywhere. I find those very annoying. But anyways, I'm just gonna stop being nice because this is Between Two Pines. Speaking of your frequent appearances on the airwaves and your showbiz credentials, I think I can help you fill out those extra medium shirts with some workouts I use. Have you ever considered lifting weights? Not only will it add some size to your skinny frame, but it will help burn off some of the stress of having to live in Florida. Let me know after the show if you're interested in some of my routines in the gym.
Yeah, man, I would take some. I would take some routines for sure. I'm always looking for. You can tell one of my tricks is to wear one size too small on the shirt, and that'll. I've been told that makes me look bigger. So that's what I obviously going a while too much.
It's the oldest trick in the book. Between you and Cuppy, I've given Florida a hard time lately on the show. But your family has been in Florida since God put the gators there. all the new Florida people have only been there since the anacondas arrived. So I give you credit for you being early adopters to sweating 350 days a year.
Yeah, I mean,
okay, last one.
Hold on. We are legitimately seventh generation Florida citizens in this family, and my kids will be eighth generation citizens, and that means my parents or my ancestors did come here before there was air conditioning, so they were that stupid. So yeah, you have a fair point here in this roast section.
So I grew up on the Gulf Coast in Texas, which is similar, and it is. The thought of living on the Gulf Coast without air conditioning is just truly shocking. All right, last one. You started off doing honest work as a carny, then went to the dark side of law, then the darker side of Wall Street. Do you ever regret leaving the fairgrounds for the spreadsheets?
Absolutely, like every day of my life. Sometimes I look out my window and watch the UPS drivers drop boxes off here, and I think, man, I wish I could just take a day where I just did physical labor versus all this mental labor. So yeah, the carny life would have been a lot easier to stick with, for sure. Yeah.
I've had very, very similar thoughts. I actually had a college job working at Six Flags overnight, like literally with a fire hose washing off the ground and like leaf blowing and stuff. So like all completely mindless work. So you could just free your mind up to do, whatever you wanted with it. And it was kind of beautiful. I kind of loved it. Like I remember being in college and the shuttle bus driver that would pick us up in the parking lot and take us into school, because at University of Houston is like the parking was insane. And I remember thinking, like, this is a great job. This guy just drives this little shuttle bus around all day. So I feel you. All right, that wraps up another edition of Between Two Pines.
Put on some headphones and listen to a podcast or something. Like, want to listen to Tailor-Made Macro? There you go.
Yeah, that's what people should be doing for sure.
Pop packages up and listen to podcasts. It's a pretty good life.
So whenever I was working at Astroworld, which no longer exists, I would listen to, this is going to be very popular with my wife when she hears it, but I would listen to, I can't think, Coast to Coast AM, which is like this ridiculous show about like paranormal stuff, like ghosts and aliens and stuff. Yeah. Oh man, what a great time that was.
Yeah. My mom had like a really intense UFO sighting but that was when she was a younger person that I grew up with that story. So I've always been kind of interested in that. So I know Coast to Coast.
All right. So just so you know, you're going to come back on, and I want you to have that story like absolutely ready to go. And I'll share my own UFO story, which also happened to happen at Astroworld. So we'll share UFO stories next time, folks.
Pivot podcast to.
Yeah, we're gonna get hijacked by aliens on next time Warren's on. So I mentioned the Wray book earlier, and I have to say I've long respected Warren Mosler, and I know I think you feel the same way, and I think you've talked to him. I was too slow in kind of adopting his higher rates, carrying stimulus views, until David Einhorn made it completely caveman simple for me. That, and of course the data beating me in a submission in 2023 while I was out bearing the plurality of economists calling for recession. My question to you is, are higher rates stimulative? And if so, is it forever or just until enough folks have to pay the short rate?
I think that all else equal, higher short-term rates are stimulative. And but in that statement, all else equal is doing a lot of work. And so I don't fully buy into the MMT, that the Mosler argument. I think that you have the interest income channel, which if you jack up the overnight rate, the SOFR rate, RRP, whatever you're talking about, that just is, that's direct income into some of the wealthiest pockets. So the rich get richer from that policy, but all else isn't equal. When you jack up short-term rates in general, usually it impacts rates across the curve. And that's where credit creation and all the borrowing takes place from year 5 to year 30. So I don't think all else is equal. Rates are a blunt tool. That's been the problem with monetary policy in this cycle, is that the Fed's kind of leaning on the old phrase, if all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail, and they're kind of just stuck with this one tool, raise rates. They do actually have another one they're just afraid to use, which is the balance sheet. But
clearly,
yeah. So I think that there is a stimulant, and it's more episodic too. So we saw this at the end of 2022. when the Fed was hiking rates aggressively, but then the market started pricing disinflation in. So bonds were bid aggressively at the end of 22, if you remember, and the yield curve inverted. And I made the case back then that I thought that inversion of the yield curve was oddly stimulative for a short period of time in the economy, where we had the interest income channel, income going out that way. And then even while the Fed's hiking rates, you had a big bid into the bond market. So mortgage rates were dropping, car loans rates were dropping. But if and when the back end of the curve decides or realizes that the front end is not going to come back to the years pre-COVID, that we've changed the economy, I think the idea that higher short end rates are stimulative is going to kind of die. It's because it's not just not everything is not equal, is what I guess would be the way of saying it.
Yeah, I think that's honestly pretty much exactly the way I view it, which is interesting. The flip side of higher rates to me, like them being stimulative, which I think it's clear they have juiced home construction. But if rates go lower and they remove income, they can shrink the deficit, they can slow home construction through golden handcuff removals. Do you think that's right? And if so, wouldn't that just lead to more rate cuts, which would just kind of deepen the problem? So like the self-reinforcing loop we've had on the way up of high rates kind of being stimulative and kind of juicing home construction, I think you could argue that you could have the exact opposite loop to the downside. Do you think that's possible?
If I'm understanding your question, yeah, it's something I've been kicking around internally here, talking about if we did have a shock to the economy and the Fed decided, let's say, to cut rates like 100 basis points, could that be perversely, I wouldn't say it's just not stimulative like it has been in the past. Right. Could they be pushing on a string trying to revive the economy in that case too? And the other question is, if we had a demand shock to the economy, and we're running 6 or 7% budget deficit at full capacity, full employment, where would the deficit be there? And then would the bond market get a bid like it has in previous demand shocks? It probably would, but maybe not quite as much as it has in the past. Maybe you don't see the 10-year go from 4.5 to 3. Maybe the 10-year just goes from 4.5 to 4 or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that's, to me, like having the deficit, possibly go up to like 8, 9, 10% of GDP makes it really hard to have that giant rally. But I mean, who knows?
Well,
but that's kind of
we've had it
why
before.
I asked.
Yeah, it gets real. We did that. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but we basically went through the deficit and said, okay, here's what, we would be in a double-digit deficit plus if you had the normal recession right now, just accounting for. And we did the whole thing like, okay, tax receipts fall this much, and the Fed cuts rates this much, and we made a bunch of assumptions, and we were still the deficit would have been huge, even just like in a mild recession scenario.
Yeah, so if that thing does become a feedback loop, if cutting rates, isn't stimulative the way it used to be, and I would argue it's not, because everyone already termed out at crazy low rates. Like the whole cutting cycle and what everyone expects it to be might be very different. The same way the hiking cycle was different than everyone expected. But what I gather listening to people is no one seems to be like, oh, it might be the opposite of what we just went through. Like, I think it's going to catch most people by surprise. But anyways, enough pontificating.
One thing I'd say really quick, because I think it's kind of an interesting conversation, is like we just had the Fed. The Fed's been very nervous to use QT. And I know there's a huge debate, which we don't have time to get into, on whether QT matters or not. I think it does matter. And I think it's through the duration channel. So QE is removing duration from the market. QT is on net adding duration back to the market. I think that matters for asset prices. Whether you can distill out how much it matters and all these other things are debates worth having and whatever. But the Fed was very quick to taper QT more aggressively than people expected. I think they will end QT faster than they suggest they will. And if we got to that place where you're talking about where they need to cut a lot and it's not working right away, I think it brings the balance sheet back into play faster than it has in previous cycles. So they would maybe start up QE faster than they had in last, and it'd be less of a negative shock needed to get them to do that. So that's just something I'm playing around with.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me, and I lean that direction, even if not for a monetary policy reason, just for keeping the government funded reason. Like it's almost like a necessity. So, all right, that was kind of two MMT-ish questions. Let's do an Austrian one. Where do you think we've seen the most malinvestment since 2020?
Oh man, I mean, probably in some areas of these new stimulus bills that have directed new industrial policy, and I guess maybe in the some of the stuff I've heard from the grid modernization stuff. It sounds good in theory, but some of the things I hear sound kind of weird. I heard a plan today. I wish I had written it down for the podcast, but it was something about doing carbon capture and sequestration and shipping it back from Japan and all. It's just so many wagging the dog stories. And I've had clients who are deep in this talking about how there are plants being built for the tax credits, but there's going to be no machinery to fill these plants in many cases. So I think that we're going to see a lot of malinvestment when we come out of this era of deficit spending and constant pro-cyclical stimulus. And so, yeah, I can't say the exact projects, but that's where it would be, in my opinion.
Yep, makes perfect sense, and that's exactly the way I kind of view it, which means it's probably something else. So going back to Blood Meridian, that begs the question: Are you a Yellowstone fan, or a Yellowstone franchise fan, I should say?
Not really. I mean, if you watch Blood Meridian, you'll get or read Blood Meridian, and it's really a pretty dark book. It's more dark than Yellowstone. I feel I did watch a season of Yellowstone, but it was a little bit too popcorn for me. Like, again, there's a pretty strong edge to that Blood Meridian book, which is why I don't even know if they could make it into a movie. It's pretty inappropriate for the current culture. But yeah, no, I'd say no. I'm a little bit, I guess, like a little darker than the Yellowstone provides. I hate to admit it, but it's true.
Fair enough. Last thing is I am going to have you send me some workout tips, because I got to let the listeners know Warren looks like Thor with a buzz cut, and I got the dad bod going on. So let's hook up on those later. But that's all I got for you, man. I appreciate you coming on and giving us your time today.
Well, I really appreciate you having me. This is a different kind of conversation, which is refreshing, and I appreciated the questions, and just the respect is all mutual. I really do appreciate what you're doing. And when we started 314, you were just such a big supporter, and it was great to have you at our back. And so we're just very appreciative. And I love what you're doing with the podcast. I think it's a nice new angle. Not just like what's going on in macro. It's getting down to, like you said, what you find interesting in the processes. And I know there are other people who find it interesting.
Yeah, well, it's off to a decent start. We're happy with how it's going, and I really appreciate that. And I knew from the jump 314 would be very successful, and I'm glad that it has been to date. I think it's just the beginning for you. And one last request, and that is to take it eeasy on me in fantasy football this year.
I was wondering if you're going to say that. And yeah, no, I mean, I don't think that's going to happen. You're just going to keep drafting. You're just going to keep drafting Carolina Panther players, which is not really a winning strategy these days. So,
well, normally it's my Browns. I overdraft Browns players typically, and that tends to destroy me. I really should just institute a no kidding like rule that I can't have any of them except maybe Nick Chubb, because Nick Chubb's Batman. But yeah, I think thanks again for coming on, man. It was great to catch up, and I hope you will be a regular guest whenever I run out of people to talk to.
No doubt about it. It's great to be here, man.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Tailor Made Macro. I just want to say a special thank you to everyone for the feedback and the support here early on with the podcast. I thought it was a good idea to kind of dig in and talk to people about their process and how they think instead of just what they think. I made the joke that this is the least actionable podcast for macro. And to be honest with you, I didn't know how popular this would be. I kind of figured most people just want to know what people think and they want their stock tip and they want to know, where the 10 years is going to be in 2 months or whatever the case may be. I just knew that I wanted to know these things from my guests. I wanted to know like what old books they read and the way they go about their research, the way they go about connecting dots, the way they go about taking time off to clear their head, all the things that we've talked about on the show that, we, in ways we don't normally get to know the people that we talk to, where normally we just get to hear what they think about Silicon Valley Bank or something of that nature. But so far, I think the response has been really good, and it's been encouraging that I'm not the only one that likes to go deeper into more evergreen topics and more, in my opinion, meaningful topics. So I just wanted to thank everyone for the support. And then naturally, I'll toss in the disclaimer. Everything we talked about today, none of it was investment advice or anything that even resembled investment advice. It was just Warren and I talking about process and bigger ideas than where markets are headed. Again, thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you again here soon.